But generally, thank you.
Got that.
Recording. Nice. Good job.
Totally forgot.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. Yeah, so we hope that this helps to get you where you want to be in this process, really talking about action for your community. So as I said, we're in this phase of scenario modeling and moving into implementation planning for the rest. So we've come through, engagement activities are underway. We're doing, we've got all that research, and so now it's really moving forward. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jared. Oh, one other point, actually, just on how the meeting will go. We have a few spots set aside throughout the next hour. Not there's 2 or 3, so we'll try to group questions. We don't want to hold questions, but we also want to make the best use of time. So if you could just hold them briefly for about 5-7 minutes of presentation, and then we'll open it up and kind of keep more of a back and forth going. Thank you.
Thank you, Erica, and good morning, everybody. My name is Jared Genova with Civics, and Civics, for those of you who don't know, I haven't been in these meetings before in this process yet, but our team is leading the implementation planning effort. So we know we're now at this point in the process where we're shifting from taking all those models, understanding the greenhouse gas emissions model for the county, and now saying, okay, now what can the county and community do about it? Our background and expertise is really working with federal and state funding for local governments. So a lot of the work that we're doing is research on a lot of new funding opportunities, and being able to understand really what is the capacity of the county, what's the capacity of county partners to be able to deliver these projects and programs over the coming years to be able to meet the targets that are set out in this model. So if we go to the next slide, I'm going to start to run through what a number of these considerations are as we're going through the planning process. Do you help me advance that, Erica? Thank you. So really, there are 3 primary considerations for implementation planning for the climate action plan. There's funding availability, there's just feasibility. Can we do it? And is there capacity available at the county or among partners to be able to do it? And then what are the community priorities that might help prioritize actions to happen either faster or at a greater scale, or in some other way where there would be leadership taken for it. So we'll walk through these 3 lenses right now in the process that we're beginning at this point. Oop, there we go. So this is our basic screen for that. So our goals here are to prioritize the climate actions because really there could be an infinite number of climate actions, but we're not going to include an infinite number of actions in a plan. But what we really want to do is rank these by what is the greenhouse gas reduction potential, what is that feasibility, and then how can we put things together to make a strategy to make it possible. Like I said, identifying specific funding pathways for these programs and policies is going to be very important because we recognize that resources are limited, and these are things that do either cost money or time. So being able to get that revenue in or those funding opportunities in means that this could be possible. So let's talk about funding. So let's move on to the next slide. Really, the name of the game right now is that there's unprecedented funding opportunity for climate actions. This is to respond to climate hazards and to mitigate climate change. There are really 3 main things to consider right now coming out of the federal government: the Inflation Reduction Act, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, and the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant Program, which came out of the Inflation Reduction Act. I'll touch on each of these 3 and how the county might be able to take advantage of it. The first one, of course, was in the news plenty, the Inflation Reduction Act. from last year, $783 billion. It's the largest piece of federal legislation ever to address climate change. It really casts a wide net. It has a lot of different programs going through many different federal agencies. In some cases, it expands programs that already existed. In some cases, it creates brand new ones. Top line benefits are lowering energy costs, working on economic development with green jobs, with good wages, growing manufacturing. We know there's a lot of these things that are even already being taken advantage of in South Carolina. So this is one way to be able to bring that to the local level as well. One of the other main points of this is that it was passed alongside or near to the bipartisan infrastructure law, so many of them work together. We'll talk a bit about stacking funding, but let's talk next about the BIL. The bipartisan infrastructure law, or BIL, is another $550 billion over the next couple of years. That is primarily for, you guessed it, infrastructure. So roads, bridges, transit, water infrastructure, climate resilience for all of those things, understanding that, seas are rising and hurricanes are getting stronger. These are ways that we can really set a foundation for major programs. And again, the state, local level, these are already being taken advantage of. And with the addition of the IRA, it means that many of those programs can be even bigger or happen even more quickly. And in this case, funding is available for all levels of government. So the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant, I want to highlight specifically because there is an opportunity to influence this. This is a specific $5 billion program for states and local governments that is coming out of the EPA. It was an IRA program. And that $5 billion, which is available as of April of 2024, so just coming up, is very specifically targeted for all the kinds of actions that we might be talking about here for the Climate Action Plan. Reducing emissions, reducing air pollution, creating co-benefits for communities, leveraging other resources. These are all really just right at the core of what climate action implementation is all about. The thing to know here is that SCORE, the South Carolina Office of Resilience, is leading the state planning effort on this. And while regionally Charleston did not qualify, there is potentially that opportunity to influence what kinds of programs and policies get into the state's planning effort. I know Ariel has been on top of that, so and potentially working with some of you on it. So that's a exciting opportunity in the very short term to be able to start to get some of these projects implemented. So next we'll talk about feasibility. So of course we can talk about all the many billions of dollars available, but if there's no way to spend those billions of dollars, then it doesn't really matter. So when we're prioritizing the climate actions in this planning process, there are a number of things that we're taking into consideration. Of course, emissions reduction potential, because ultimately all those actions have to stack up to make it so that the low carbon scenario that we'll talk about a little bit later actually becomes a reality. Two, the capacity to act. This is not necessarily a scientific exercise, understanding capacity to act, but really what kinds of staffing resources, what kinds of existing funding, what kinds of delivery mechanisms exist at the county or among partners to be able to do it. In terms of prioritization, will this improve services that the county already delivers? Of the things that communities count on by the county, can any of these programs or actions improve that? Cost, of course. So if the cost is too great, it's going to be difficult to prioritize. If there are major funding resources that are easily available and can be taken advantage of to lower that cost, then maybe there are. And then finally here, and certainly not last, is co-benefits and equity benefits. So for each of these climate actions, we know that there are other knock-on effects. And what are those potential benefits that any climate action could deliver? So we can talk a bit more about that moving on. So next two slides, I'm going to go over what the questions are that we're asking of these actions. So this is an analysis, really. So there's, like I said, there's an infinite number of actions that could be taken. But when we start to narrow it down based on these priorities, we have to ask questions of each of them to make sure that it's appropriate for the plan and appropriate for the county. So number one, is it likely that this will have a significant impact on emissions reductions? That's kind of given based on the goal of this plan. Next, is this a priority that needs to be addressed now, in the next 5 to 10 years, next 10 to 20 years? This is really just recognizing that the plan is not a short-term plan, it's a long-term plan. So there's going to be short-term actions, there's going to be medium-term actions, and there will be long-term actions as well. Is it within the county's authority? Is this something that we can actually decide on and do? Or, is it legal to do this with the county's authority, or does this belong under somebody else's jurisdiction? Is there sufficient staff capacity and expertise to carry it out, or does something else need to happen? Is it enough of a priority to augment staff or to hire consultants, for example? Next slide, please. Right alongside of that is, are there resources readily available, or can they be obtained? And if they can be obtained, who needs to do that? Who needs to write the grant application? Who needs to manage it? And then, are there existing pathways that already exist? Are there contracts that are already in place that might be able to be amended? Are there resources that might be able to be leveraged to get new resources? That's the kind of question that you would ask of each of these. Next, has this been identified as important by the community? Some of the work that's been done already in terms of meeting with community groups, some of the webinars that we've held, some of the meetings like this one too, these are opportunities to document those community priorities. If there's that priority that already exists, it's been stated, it's been documented, then that means that priority level can increase. Alongside that, does it create co-benefits for the county and community? In terms of those priorities that already existed, visions for the future for Charleston County, are there opportunities within these actions to achieve those, or achieve something different? And then finally here, does it have the potential to reduce inequities? Along the same lines, but also very specific to disadvantaged communities, historically under invested communities. Can this improve the conditions in those geographies or among those populations? Next slide, please. This is just a glimpse into really how we're organizing this. Each of those questions we're asking of every single action. Ultimately, we're going to have an entire database of actions with a database of answers to these questions, and then be able to score them on the back end. So that scoring, which we'll be talking about over the coming weeks and months, is how we will be able to say, yes, this could be a priority, or this needs to maybe wait a little longer. This is something we should take advantage of soon. This is something that, while we think is important, might need to wait till a new type of funding opportunity or a market trend has surpassed where we are today. But this is really the model that we're using to document all of this information, perform the analysis, and then work with Ariel and the county team to really understand that better. Next, please.
Thanks so much.
Yes.
Okay, so we're just taking a little break here on our learning about implementation to make sure we're all on the same page. So we wondered if you have any questions or observations thus far. But we'll get into a couple examples after this of how those criteria and that evaluation that Jared described could play out in some scenarios. But just in general, any feedback there about the concepts?
I'll just add that you're doing what we have done in the past in other jurisdictions, which makes a lot of sense. So you're on. We think you're on the right path. How's that? Or I think you're on. I think you're on the right path.
I appreciate that.
Well, and I've got a few comments on the evaluation structure, like the framework. Not what you just showed is just an example, right? So for me, I always find it interesting to set up an evaluation framework that has both quantitative criteria and qualitative criteria. And I think in this case, it might be helpful to have kind of like a multi-level evaluation framework in which you're combining the cost and effectiveness, so that potential to reduce greenhouse gases into one category, and that's the first cut. And then moving on to some of the other qualitative categories afterwards. That way we can focus on what could get done really, or would have a big impact. And then the secondary question of what can we actually implement given resources.
Yeah, that sounds good. And I think we can definitely kind of adjust, where some of those things land. I know, in this database idea, we have it so that we can continue to manipulate it, because of, for anywhere that that we're trying to do this, the questions might be a little different. So that's another thing that we're going to work on over the coming weeks is refining those questions, particularly around the feasibility side of things, because that has to be really tailored to what kinds of capacities exist today and what you think might exist in the near future.
I guess just the recommendation on going to cost effectiveness and separating that out is so that you can have a continuous scale instead of a discrete scale, like the example showing, because we're going to have strategies that are very different in terms of cost. And so I think that would be essential. But secondary question is, for something like co-benefits, do we have the capacity through this project to monetize those? Or is it just going to be a qualitative discussion?
I think it sort of depends what the priority of the action ends up being. I think in some cases it might be pretty straightforward to monetize some of those, but in others it would be more of a qualitative discussion. I think for the top actions, that would be where the co-benefits would be pretty clear, and there's pretty clear research on that shouldn't be that big of a lift, but to do that for all of them would probably be out of scope.
One thing I can add, though, too, is that just as you're going to see the low carbon pathway projection model later in the meeting today, the next step in the modeling process is also modeling the financial projections of the actions themselves. And that's also what will give us a better sense too of what co-benefits that go along with those actions could be monetized. So that's all part of this discussion, as we go forward.
Thanks, Naomi. Yeah, that's a part, that whole modeling. Again, that's another part of this qualitative, quantitative mix. So that is an exciting aspect of this. So it might be able to be broken down a little bit more discreetly.
But we've taken down the note from this piece of feedback today for consideration as well.
Great, thank you. Great question and comments. Anything else before we get into some examples to illuminate this a bit more? Okay, every minute's precious. I'll get you started here then, Jared.
Thank you. Yeah, so this is just one way. This is going to focus, and to your point, this is going to be the more qualitative side of things, because we haven't really entered that quantitative analysis of any of these yet. Starting from the qualitative, starting from the research aspect, what is the background on these for both the county and especially that funding availability side of things? This is just one example here. So this is the very high level part of this. This is also just for your benefit. We've got, much longer explanations and research citations for these things in our database. This is just to kind of understand what the top line takeaways would be for each of these within an action. So to use the example of upgrading the county's fleet to electric vehicles or zero emissions vehicles, starting with the very top question of county authority. Does the county have the authority to do this? Is it within jurisdictional control? Is it legal? In this case, yes, the county owns the fleet and maintains the fleet. So we can say pretty confidently that there's total jurisdictional control. When it comes to staffing and technical capacity, this is where it starts to become that bridge between qualitative and quantitative. So qualitatively speaking, this does require a specific kind of knowledge and capacity to maintain them, maintain electric vehicles, but it's something that could be streamlined, especially the acquisition of them, if there are things like existing fleet contracts in place, or if there's turnover that might be happening already. So these are the things that we would then have to confirm. So we would start from a position like this of this is our assumption. And honestly, the best way to do this is to conduct some brief interviews with the folks who would actually be doing this. So the fleet operations department would be a good place to start, or just being able to work with Ariel and other county staff members to understand the reality of what it is today. With that, same thing with existing resources, just from kind of distant research, we don't necessarily know what the contracts are or what the relationships are, but to kind of start that conversation off, we know at least there's fleet department, there are existing facilities. Can those be modified? That would be part of the next round of understanding, where do the maintenance shops need special equipment? Will they, how would that adaptation occur? In terms of the next one here, in terms of readiness, this is another one that's definitely qualitative of, is this something that we want to do, that we want to prioritize? At the same time, there are also just market or practical forces at play. So one, are they more readily available, electric vehicles? Is the current fleet outdated? Is the current fleet approaching its at the end of its life cycle? This was a good example at the state level for electric buses for schools, where the state of South Carolina ended up purchasing the largest number of school buses in the country, electric school buses, partially because the old buses were well past the end of their life cycle or expected life cycle. So that made it a very easy choice to be able to say, okay, well, we have a bunch of funding available to purchase new electric buses that upgrades them, and we remove the safety hazard of the old buses. So these are things that also have to be understood a little bit more specifically, especially for high level, high priority actions like a fleet replacement. Community readiness, this is another one. We say TBD here because this is also something that is good to test with communities. So as engagement continues, is this something people want? Also, is there infrastructure available already in the community to be able to service a new fleet like this? Next one, please.
Oh, wait, can we interrupt for a minute?
Yeah,
are
sure.
we allowed to interrupt?
Please.
Based on your other thing?
No,
So,
agree. Yeah.
thank you. So under replacement of the fleet, are you including, because it's not listed there, the decrease in maintenance so you're looking at the life cycle of the vehicle rather than just a purchase price of the vehicle? That's number one. Number two, we have a very unique situation here in the county because Trident Tech is in the process Actually, they've created a course for future maintenance individuals on EV maintenance. And so the partnership with them. So as you do this, you also need to look at the availability of resources within the county that would be able to provide that changeover if we're going to take that changeover. So two
Those
things.
are
One, the total cost of the vehicle over the life cycle of that vehicle, and the fact that we do have the ability here to train people through programs that already exist at Trident Tech.
I personally love both of those comments. Both of those things are great. I think part of that financial analysis too understands that life cycle of a vehicle, for example. But yeah, 100%. That is absolutely critical. Understanding the decrease in maintenance, the decrease in fuel costs, things like that along the life cycle of that, and then that comment about a training program, that's something we're actually about to ask you right after this in terms of existing initiatives. And what we're going to need is, we're really going to need your help with this, because we know that there's so much out there, and we can kind of tee it up like this, and we can do the research that we can do. But if you know things off the top of your head like that are direct connections, that's how we end up building out these tables much more accurately, and can actually give you enough information to make decisions. Because if that were omitted, then you might not consider how easy it would be to transition.
Yeah, we under Ariel and the city, we had a very successful EV event last month, where we had every possible EV vehicle from the lowest level to the highest level, but also learning that our local bus corridor, which is Charleston area rapid transit, I get that right? Regional transit, now has 30 electric buses, so, and growing.
Yeah, and I just want to mention for the existing resources, especially for the actions that are going to be like just for the county internal, like the other example for transitioning the fleet, that we have an internal group that includes fleet facilities. So we're going to have their input on these. I think these are going to be a little trickier, that are going to be community wide, that we're going to have to, figure out all the parts of those.
Yeah, well, and to that, just kind of general question about the framework. So what would be a good approach for documenting the political will side of it? Are we surveying county council?
I've said it before, so we rely heavily on our staff, our financial folks, our fleet and facilities and all that. So we'll listen to hear what they have to say. In the end, if it doesn't fit in the budget, it doesn't happen. So that's going to be a constriction.
Well, I guess that'll be said in a different category. Is political will getting at like just the opinion of county council, or based off the other information that they're seeing, what they think makes sense?
I don't think there's anyone on county council that would not agree that reducing greenhouse gas emissions and carbon is not a good thing. I think the issue really is, it gets back to feasibility. It may be phased in steps. I think fleet management, looking at, I'm on the CARTA chats and the COG as well. So we have a lot of these discussions and watching what's going on with the CARTA system right now and their conversion to electric buses. There are some headwinds in the sense, like right now, we bought these electric buses. Now that company's gone out of business or been sold. We can't get parts for them. We've got equipment sitting on the sideline that we can't operate because we can't get parts. Not that the electric's bad, it's just this is the growing pains. And so we want to make sure when we step into that role, we're not creating problems where they're none. So we want to make sure the timing of it works and we don't run into deficiencies. And so I'm paying attention to all that, and we are, but again, it's also where we can do it. I think the fleet vehicles that people use to get around, I think that's a great idea for electric vehicles. Then you start looking into like a public works, tractors, bulldozers, backhoes, dump trucks, heavy equipment. I don't know that we're anywhere near that yet as far as the technology. Right. We were getting there, but in a perfect world, you know, it's gonna make it timing and feasibility and cost are all things that are gonna weigh it up to us.
And Kyle, just to answer your question a little more with the political will, we are planning to meet with the county council members to get their opinion on these things. But in addition, I think when we see what's on the agenda for the county council, you know, for example, affordable housing has been a big issue, like we will take that into consideration. So if it's ranked lower as a priority for county council, it might be an action that, it's not that we're not gonna do it, but that's gonna be like more in the future, but not a
I'll throw it there real quick too. I mean, it's like how we have to adapt. I mean, you know, we live in a special area here with all the water and water crossings and the cost of any construction, of any infrastructure. And it's like our country, the rapid transit. That's, you know, gonna be basically, letting the rail would have been ideal, but we just can't get it done. And so this is the next best thing. And even that's been a challenge on how long it's going to take to actually get it implemented and actually rolling. You know, one of the things was we actually wanted to go all the way up to Somerville, but at present it's only going to go to Lansing. You know, it's like that's the critical part, because those are the folks that are actually using our interstate coming down. You know, and so we don't have that connection established.
Well, and I just meant it from a practical standpoint. So if there's going to be discussions with county council staff, I just see how we get it done.
Well, and this is probably further down the line, but it's related to political will, is the will of the business community and the will of the general populace to, we all know there are going to be costs associated with some of this conversion, right? And the costs are going to be shared among the citizens, and the cost of voting structures, the cost is going to be in the way businesses have to change to make a business. At some point in time, paired probably with the public relations sort of effort, is measuring the political will of the business community and the community at large, because that influences that political will in the application.
I don't disagree with you. But that's why I said before, every time we do something, look at the life cycle of either the building or the vehicle. And if we look at that and present it that way, you might be spending a few extra dollars up front, but you're saving so much more money down the road. And if we don't look at a life cycle of something, then we're not looking at the real picture.
Absolutely agree, but the general consumer is not informed enough to understand
You're right.
what you just said.
I
absolutely agree with you.
You're absolutely correct.
I violently agree with you.
And again, I've used this example before. Georgetown, Texas is this close to being 100% renewable. And they don't even talk about climate change. The mayor talks about, I'm saving my taxpayers money. So, right.
Yeah, and I think that what you were talking about will be a big piece of the community readiness.
And I'll throw out one other thing. I think for, you know, I call it the traditional municipality, I think it's an easier proposition because of the size and scope of their footprint. Now, North Charleston is an exception to that. You know, but we have 3 of the 4 largest municipalities in Charleston County. That's the same county. So as much as we can do on the county level, we need buy-ins from those municipalities to join us. And I think it needs to be collaborative, where we can leverage funds and efforts. I think that would be ideal because, I mean, you know, again, so much of Charleston County is urbanized.
Yeah, I totally agree. And our other working group does have representatives from both Charleston and Mount Pleasant and Charleston, the city of Charleston. So sorry, I will turn it back over to Jared since I know we have.
I had one more.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
So
Sorry.
same thing along the kind of practical way that we get to documenting community readiness.
Yeah.
What's in the scope for outreach outside of the working groups? If you can remind me.
Yeah, we have an engagement slide, so we're gonna talk about that.
Okay, awesome. So that was nice to eavesdrop on you all having that conversation and working all that out. It's really informative, and I hope you get more time like that today too. So Jared's just got a couple more things on this, and then we'll move forward to the next bit. The other thing to emphasize is, like, all these thoughts that you have, please put them in the workbook at any time. It's always an opportunity to share these kind of insights. You can just record it and then just stick a sound file in there. That works for us too. So what else do you have to say about this particular example, Jared?
Well, before I return to it, I do want to say I really like that Georgetown, Texas example. I couldn't tell on the video who actually said it. I'm sorry. But Georgetown, I I used to live in Central Texas at one time, and it's a good example of a bedroom community that no one really would have expected to turn all of their operations to electric, because it's sort of in the shadow of big Austin, and Austin gets all the credit all the time, but in fact it's the bedroom communities around Austin that have been doing a lot of that really good work. So I like that example a lot, because these are the kinds of things that sometimes fly under the radar in terms of case studies. So those are the things we'd love to look at. A good example is actually on this page right now, Winter Park, Florida, another one, bedroom community for Orlando. They had some really interesting work on fleet electrification. This is really the second part of this. Like, are there existing programs out there that could be used as models? Are there existing plans that are either in place, on the shelf, in progress at the county or at the state, that might be able to help these things out? We know that, even among folks in the room right now, you might have touched some of these things before. Transportation plans that are already on the books, do they include some sort of EV readiness? Are there charging infrastructure plans on the books? We know the state has one. Is there something that maybe someone was working on that hasn't necessarily been published yet? These are also things that are really good to identify now. It's the other thing where these synergies start to happen, right? It's like, if in this plan being published to say that electric vehicle fleet replacement is a priority, it might mean that other plan, that other transportation plan regionally could get accelerated. Maybe it needed a little push to actually to get finished and get published. So
Can I comment right here?
Yeah.
There may be an opportunity within the business community, and putting my old chamber hat on, but also my builder hat. We have large scale businesses that operate fairly significant fleets in this region too. It could be that we reach out for, and I would suggest a pilot that would parallel with the county, particularly if we can provide some type of incentive, i.e. a discounted purchase of the vehicle. You may be able to get a decent number of businesses to buy into the county's process, and thereby converting other fleets outside of just the county. So I might encourage
Love that idea.
I might encourage you to think to it and not use the word county and do regional or county business, because we could probably find half a dozen or a dozen businesses that would enter into a pilot with the county.
Okay, yeah, thanks. That's good to know.
Yeah, there are companies in the region maintain huge fleets.
Well, yeah, it just paralleling what you just said, in trying to do some of the zoning changes for the city on EV charging and EV ready, we actually had meetings with the chamber. I don't know if you were part of that. With the chamber a number of different times, and took so many of their recommendations back in trying to come up with a final proposal, which we haven't done yet, but we're working on.
I mean, even with my membership, I have 5 or 6 companies that probably maintain 100 plus vehicles in their fleet. So you could probably create a business solution here to pilot what could then lead to larger adoption down the road.
Okay.
But I'll go back to one thing I think I said last time is, and going back to the business side of this, I'm all about incentivizing, folks to purchase it. Mandating is a whole different world. People generally, again, respond to incentive over propulsion. And I guess the other thing is kind of letting the market build itself. As more folks transition over to electric vehicles, there's going to be demand for more charging stations, more electric vehicle infrastructure. And I think eventually it'll start to phase out the other over time, but I don't know that we can like flip a switch literally. I think that the public buy-in and the public willingness to transition is what's going to drive this. And then that will be the support that folks like me need on the county and the state and the federal folks to build that infrastructure, because the demand will be there for the folks to serve.
And along the lines of incentive, it could be a couple of ways. We can incent them installing charging stations at businesses and provide funding for them to do that. We could work with dealerships to provide some type of cost structure that would make sense because you're mass purchasing. I think that we could get creative in a pilot situation to incent, and I'm with you 100%. It's one thing, to incent businesses, you're going to get a whole lot more adoption.
We'll talk more about that in detail.
We also,
Anyway.
we're also seeing that we might come up with a universal charging dock. GM and Ford are now adopting in 2024 Teslas, so that everyone can be sharing charging stations. I think.
Yeah, hopefully a federal solution to that. That
Yeah.
should be.
That, good
Yes,
point,
that would be
good
great.
point.
All right, we have about 15 minutes. I'm gonna let you.
We
This is great discussion.
Yeah, I love this. And honestly, this is the kind of discussion that we're going to want to have for a number of these. I did just want to point out two things on that last slide before we move. One, just in that market sense, one of the last pieces there was induced demand. So this is one of these effects where if all of a sudden the county now has a number of electric vehicles and there's charging demand for that, that can induce further demand for EV infrastructure in service territories all over the county. So maybe that's putting some of these in a more decentralized way that you wouldn't have necessarily considered before. And on that market development side of things, the more infrastructure that exists, it's much more easy to make that leap to say, oh, maybe I will, purchase or lease an electric vehicle, so that I don't have to worry about where I'm going to charge it, which is so often the first thing that people would say is like, oh, where am I going to charge it? It's going to take too long, et cetera, et cetera. So taking that first step at the county level can also help induce that. And then especially when you have partnerships like you're discussing right now with businesses that maintain fleets that have land holdings as well, that could have that kind of infrastructure, that just makes it happen even faster. Last piece I want to touch on here is the potential funding line item here. This is just from our basic research on two programs that are brand new from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act, Charging and Fueling Infrastructure Grant Program and Clean Heavy Duty Vehicles Program. These are things that are available today, and in over the coming years, they might be available annually, or you might just have one bite at the apple. That's where it's going to be important to in that chronology of action, prioritizing it. So getting into that next level of when the county can take advantage of it, or when tax credits might be available to businesses as pass-throughs from the county, for example, that could be another way to think about this. What is the funding relationship between the federal government and the county? What's the funding and tax incentive relationship between the county and businesses? So just wanted to make sure we touched on that before we moved on, because all of those considerations are important for the actions as we proceed.
Perfect. Thanks, Jared. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to Naomi. We've got about 10 minutes left, so I think she has a few things to say about community priorities, and then a few minutes left at the end for the TICA.
I don't have anything to do with priorities, or like Jared was going to talk about that, but we're not going to have enough time, and I want to respect the time of the hour. Jared, did you want to say something quick about this? And then I'm going to talk about the workbook for understanding the low carbon model, and to encourage members of the RSAC to ask us questions there about it.
I don't need to say much about this. I think y'all have a perfectly good understanding of how these programs can get shaped. You're already talking about it. So that's the kind of work that we'll need to do in the coming weeks and months to make these real.
Just really quick, does anyone need to leave right at 10:30? Or I think we can take a little bit more time if we need to.
I think on our end, we have a couple people that do need to go at the set time. We have other obligations, but of course you all are happy to, welcome to converse without us, and then perhaps let us know if anything comes up.
I can also stay a bit longer, but yeah, I'll keep my section within the hour for us, and then I can stay to answer further questions about it too.
Okay, super. I also just would point out that if there's anyone who hasn't spoken today, hasn't had a chance to voice any questions or insights, we'd also welcome that too. We like to hear from everybody. Okay, so what slide are you looking for? Naomi, are you going to look for a slide today, or are you just going to speak? Can I,
Yeah, no,
can I
great.
turn this off? Okay.
Let's go past this. All members of the RSAC, you have access to this presentation in the workbook as well. So you're welcome to also take more time on the slides and ask us more questions. So let's go back one to that wedge diagram. So what we've done between the last meeting and this meeting is we've taken the low carbon assumptions that were discussed in that meeting and done the first draft of the low carbon modeled scenario. So this wedge diagram means that the colorful parts essentially of it are the different discrete actions that Jared and his team are, of course, taking a further look at, that you've just gotten that first look into what stages of implementation look like. So this essentially sets the direction and the speed and acceleration, if you will, to take those actions to meet the targets for 2035 and 2050. This scenario is modeled under a science-based target scenario. So you might recall from reading the paper from the last meeting too, we discussed the 4 different target options. And so the science-based option was the one that was selected. So there's a long list of actions, essentially there. Oops, can you still hear me? It looks like okay.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, thought there was a problem with my internet connection, but it looks like it's good. That's great. So there's a series of actions listed here that then the implementation portion of the project will work to sort of complete the puzzle. So as I was mentioning, this sort of sets, how much and how fast sort of thing too. And then Jared figures out how to make it feasible and implementable sort of from it. So that's how the partnership essentially works. Let's go into the next slide though, and I'll walk through the main takeaways from this type of a graph. So the scenario essentially provides a blueprint for implementation planning by, again, showing how much and how quickly emissions need to be reduced in each of the sectors. All actions must be implemented in order to reach the low carbon target, or sometimes called the climate pollution reduction target. This diagram shows the relative impact of each of the actions, and it highlights the importance of low emissions electricity in meeting the climate goals for Charleston County, so specific to your region. And again, the target used to create this scenario for 2035 is science-based, with 2020 as the base year, because we don't have the in the science-based sort of target scenario, 2005 is the base year, but there's no inventory for that year, so we've advanced it to 2020 where we have the inventory. Let's go to the next slide, and I'll walk through an example quickly. I'm taking one of the actions, so residential building retrofit actions, it's third from the bottom in the wedge diagram. What that means is, in order to achieve that, is that we need to switch from fossil fuels to electricity for residential buildings. We need to improve insulation in the building envelope, reduce the total energy demand that's used by each of the dwellings. This will also reduce costs to heat and cool homes. More efficient houses will hold temperature longer, and power outages as well. Sort of this, we start to get a little bit into co-benefits discussion. Deep emissions reductions require low emissions electricity sources though, of course. And so including things like solar panels and other renewable energy options. This also will have to include looking at battery storage or other energy storage to increase the ability to withstand, of course, power outages as well. And that's something that's a concern, of course, to folks in the county. So how does this happen, and when? And again, implementation planning helps answer that part of the equation, so that Jared has like clear direction of and a sense of how far and how fast things have to go, so he can align that with all of the factors that he's discussed in his part of the presentation. So it factors in the funding opportunities, the feasibility, the county capacity, and the community priorities. This is where you really see the nexus of the entire project coming together, where we're listening and engagement, where we're getting direction and feedback from yourselves, other members of the public that we have involved essentially in this process, and general community conversations and feedback.
May I interrupt? The last time we were together, we raised the issue of you checking or communicating with Dominion, Duke, and Berkeley Cooperative to see what plans they have to change the mix that's used to make our electricity here. So you need to continue or to do that and have that as an item, one of those issues of tasks that need to be completed. Because if Dominion is going to go through and we're actually closing 2 coal power plants in the next 5 years, that's going to have a major impact. Even if they go to natural gas, it's still going to have a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. And I think you need to have that in your mix as well.
It's already included.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Matt, dovetail on your
Yeah.
comment right there. So this brings up another question: is our electrical infrastructure and its capacity when we put all these electrical charging stations and stuff on our electrical grid, do they have the sufficient infrastructure to supply all that additional electricity over and above what they're doing now? And I don't know the answer to that question, but I'd like to hear from them. So I'd like that
Yeah,
information as well.
Joe, that's a really important point. The town of James Island went and built a new fire station on Folly Road, and they were limited on the amount of solar panels they could put on the roof because of the wiring of that in that area for capacity. So you're absolutely correct that has.
I mean, that gets down to literally the power lines themselves, as well as the ability to generate the power. I mean, we've got hydroelectric, some nuclear, we got a little bit of everything, obviously.
But we have a lot of nuclear for us.
Just to answer your question, though, Dominion doesn't have the capacity for full electrification.
They do not.
But that's not what we're.
No,
realistically
but I'm
looking
saying
at.
as we're striving to bring on switching over
Yeah,
from
yeah, but-
combustion to.
They're very much modeling out where they need to be at any given time. So I don't think we have to be too worried about that. In terms of this plan. In reality,
Oh, no,
yes,
no,
very
I'm
much.
just talking about as it moves forward.
Yeah.
That's great. Thanks for that. We have, Amber, our modeler, with us today, and she's factored in their current decarbonization plans in the current scenario that we see. We will be having another draft scenario, though, as well. And someone has already asked a question this morning in the workbook, which is great, about the modeling and the assumptions, which is wonderful. So I've jumped in and answered that question. But to let everyone know quickly, the question was, will you receive all the data and the assumptions? So the assumptions you receive live in the process, like in the last meeting, we dove into that. You'll see them in a spreadsheet. This is the sort of modeled result of the current assumptions. We're just getting some more data related to transportation from the last meeting. So that request has been submitted and we're about to receive it. So in December, you'll see another version of this scenario. So we'll talk about it a bit again, and we're going to talk about implementation again in December as well. So we're just beginning the implementation discussion. So thank you very much for that and for your feedback as well. So please do dive in. And sort of finish answering the question. So you do receive the assumptions live. As they change, though, because of feedback and new, sort of information as we acquire it during this process, we update, and we will update you at each stage as well. When the assumptions are final and the project is done, we also issue what's called a data methods and assumptions manual. So all of the data, methods, and assumptions that were used and how they were used are also reported on in the final plan as well. So thank you very much for that question.
If I can go back real quick, because I don't want it to be lost. As the assumptions are built in the last slide, particularly with retrofitting existing structures, an important nuance that's somewhat unique to low country and coastal plain communities. I would not want an assumption that national standards can be applied here easily, because we as a result of our environment, both coastal flooding and pest control, deal with some unique challenges that will shape what can actually be done with retrofitting. So I don't want to go wonky into it, but I would ask that you just, as that's built out, that we not assume that national standards can always be applied in our region.
For sure. We've noted that too in here, just as you've said that in our notes. So that's great. Thank you very much for that feedback.
I've got a specific question. I don't know, Naomi, if it's for you or for Amber, but I'm surprised looking at that science-based target scenario that combined, or the electrification of the county fleet outpaces all of transit, active transportation, electrification of the commercial fleet, and personal fleet as an outcome of those together. That's unexpected to me, based off all the research I've read. Do you have any insights into why the county fleet would have that large of an impact?
I will look into it and get back to you and see what's going on there. But thanks for bringing that to my attention.
Yeah, just a secondary question in there. What are we defining as green fuels? Are we talking hydrogen, biofuels? How does that separate out from electrification?
Yeah, I was using hydrogen and it just assuming it was green, so it doesn't have an emission factor. But the idea is to sort of substitute anything of your choosing as the green fuel or as the green fuel. But in the model, I'm just using hydrogen.
Great. Thanks, Amber, and thanks for the question. All right, let's go on to the next slide. So just wanting to emphasize, we recognize this is a first look, so would love to invite you to take a look at the scenarios in the workbook as well, with the points that I just discussed as well. And another draft scenario will be made after this, and we'll come back to you too for discussion. All right, next slide.
Yeah, so right now we just had more time set aside for discussion. We've sort of worked it all through the meeting. But that I think that is basically the end of the technical side and the implementation side. So we can just take a few minutes now to get a little update from Latika, please. Thanks.
Hey, good morning, everyone. I've heard a lot of suggestions about community engagement, but also wanted to just give a quick update of what Ariel and I have been working on. So our focus since the last meeting when I came on was to engage municipalities and community stakeholders for in-person discussion. And as a result of that, we also ended up creating a questionnaire with Jared and his team to basically engage as many people as possible, understanding we might not be able to get everyone in person, but having the opportunity to also have a questionnaire to get their thoughts as well. The areas of which I wanted to give you a quick update on was the community engagement and outreach. A strategy was created to engage diverse stakeholders through the community partners, and a lot of those look like organizations that, thank you, Naomi, has dropped the link in the workbook as well. And so that was looking at various community partners that have either a membership base or significant amount of followers, either that aligned with this work or that had an audience that we could engage in case we were not able to engage them directly ourselves. Residents, as well as business owners and congregations in all municipalities. And so within that space, we have a result of us looking at our communications also. So understanding that with this information, not everyone understands a lot of the topics we've been discussing in today's meeting, but also may not acknowledge that all the things you're talking about is something that impacts them every day that they're connected to or involved in every day, no matter how they show up. So in order to do that, we wanted to make sure this information was something that they could relate to as they were connected to it. And that looked like a revised website. So now you'll see on the website, it reflects more information and promotes the engagement for the plan. It has descriptives, it has links to past videos, it has who's the consultants, it also has who you are as well as the other committee. So it definitely reflects more of like, okay, what is this and why are we asking you to be engaged? And then what's the call to action for them to be involved? We also sent our first e-alert to over 200 people. This department has never had a connection via email to engage with people. So a e-update was sent out, and that was including all of the information that I just shared of what we did, what has happened, and also encouraging them to invite us to one of their community meetings or like a monthly member gathering, or even in their neighborhood for neighborhood associations, as well as if they weren't able to do that due to the time frame, then could they please share the questionnaire and also take it themselves. We also redesigned our marketing content, which consisted of flyers, social media, etc., and also have those, so they have visuals on it. There's an infographic that was created to break down the experience of what this means to you, as well as we got it translated into Spanish for those that speak Spanish. And so so far, we have had a total of 4 in-person meetings that are now scheduled. And what I mean by that is 3 are confirming when that will look like for us to engage with them and come in person, one of which is the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. The other is one that Ariel and I will be at tonight, which is the Charleston Climate Coalition. We'll be meeting at the College of Charleston and doing an in-person presentation as well as engagement session with questions and answers. This is a very engaging group, so we think we'll get a lot of feedback. And we'll also try to host as many groups as possible and make sure that we have representation and partners sharing content with their supporters and members. We're still pushing that out. Lastly, as Naomi had mentioned, the questionnaire is in your workbook, and that is to encourage as many people to engage as possible if they cannot do in person. And as of yesterday, we had received 115 responses to the questionnaire. And this is a very detailed questionnaire. Please do check it out and also participate yourself. One of the questions I would love to pose to you all is that I heard you mentioned the Chamber of Commerce, and if you have a contact there, or if you have someone directly you've already gained relationship with that knows of this process, we would love to see how we can work through them. I have some contacts, but it always helps to not reinvent the wheel. And then the second part of that,
Diamond's in
On
the,
this group.
yeah, Diamond, she's not here today, but she's on the group, so.
got it. Okay, then
TK,
we'll work
you
with
know me,
that.
I represent the builders, so between the two of us, you're getting a pretty wide swath.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear that well.
TK, you know, this is Adrian, and I'm the
Oh, okay.
Builders Association, so between the two of us, you're getting a pretty wide swath.
Okay, all right. Well, if there's anyone else or any organizations that you think of, or even municipalities that you're connected to that that will help us bridge the gap in engaging them as well, please do let Ariel know, and we'll add it to our list to connect to them. But as of today, that is our update for engagement. And you might not be able to see it. I don't know. I can't see it from my part, but December, was that 15th?
Yeah.
Thank you. December 15th is the deadline for responses from the community. So whether it's an in-person or response to the questionnaire, this will give Jared and his team enough time to process the responses and add it to the implementation before we have the next meeting in the spring. Any questions or thoughts?
That's great. Thanks, Katika.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Well, if there aren't any more questions, I think I will anyway deke out from my team. If there's anything else that that Jared or Amber or Naomi or Katika can answer for you, I think they're available for a couple more minutes, maybe.
I just want to emphasize, we need to be careful over email, because if we all start conversing, then it can be like a meeting. So that's why we're trying to emphasize to put your questions and thoughts in the workbook. So if you do have any, since we're not meeting until December, if you have any thoughts about that, then please let us know. Definitely open to hearing that. And yeah, that's.
Yeah,
You
definitely.
want to close this out?
Well, for me, I think I'm very interested in learning more about what things we can do zoning wise, as far as changes to the ordinance we talk a lot about EV vehicles, but not about the parking lots, and the zoning really sets the stage for what we expect, the expectation for the minimum standards for people who are developing or redeveloping their property. And even if what a minimum reasonable recommendation would be for an expectation for, is it one EV station per 50 parking spaces, a smaller business that may not have the funds to incorporate that into their design or development, or if it's a larger parking lot or multifamily development or things like that, or how the parking lot is designed, and other energy savings besides the EV vehicles. I'm just really interested in learning more about that, or having at least a document. The staff is really interested in taking something forward to change the ordinance to update it for what's the current needs, but even just to have a document that we can hang our hat on, that this is the recommendation, this is why we're setting this expectation, just to get some backing.
That's great. Thank you. We've also noted that too. So wonderful.
Yeah, and anything you can, I am not a zoning expert at all, so any help you could provide there about the zoning stuff.
Yeah,
would be
because
super helpful.
really
the parking lot's a great thing. I mean, something that people don't think about.
Yeah, I mean, it's the designer is going to meet the minimum standards, so we need to set what the minimum standards is going to be and what's reasonable for people, but to sort of get to going in that direction where it's a
So, Ariel, they're gonna, the group, the SECO group is going to come up with some specific suggestions for reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and then we're going to discuss those, or is that gonna go to the other committee, or how?
Naomi, do you want to talk? Yeah,
Yeah, okay,
okay, thank you.
thanks, guys.
Did you hear what Stuart said?
Part of it cut out. Just could you repeat it? for
Okay,
me?
I'll repeat it. So we have some general ideas of what we might want to do in reducing greenhouse gas emissions. We talked about all the possible things that could happen. Are you going to come back to us with specific suggested recommendations that we will debate to see whether or not we think it's feasible to move on with? I'll do a crazy one, all right? Just because this is one that we're going to require any new multi-family homes being built should have X number of EV ready capacity. Is that something that you would come back to in being specific, or are you going to maintain the recommendations being general? And then once you make those recommendations, what's our role with those recommendations?
That's a great question.
I'm sorry, based on everything we talked about, staffing, financial, all those other different
Well,
areas.
before you answer, can I add, not a caveat, but an additional request for that? We're gonna make a recommendation like that, we need to also evaluate the cost, impact of that on.
All those different, I'm sorry, all those different things we talked about before as variables.
And I would go one step further, we wouldn't mandate that until the federal government decides what the uniform charging station looks like, if all the manufacturers are gonna agree to.
So for instance,
So when they put the infrastructure in, it's something that can service everyone.
so I've worked with Katie at the City of Charleston, and their new single, you're probably familiar, this basic infrastructure being installed is now the default rather than, prescribing what's installed. The basic infrastructure is then retrofit from there.
Yeah.
But there is a cost to that. And we talk about housing affordability. I just, I think we have to at least be aware.
Or certain size development or certain size parking lot. So if you had 200 parking spaces, maybe one for every 50 parking spaces or something like that, or one per certain amount of dwelling units or.
And I'll be the greedy business community. If we can then incent the person to do it in some way, then it's even better, because then you can make a win-win for, okay, we're gonna ask you to do it, one for 50, one for whatever, but then if we can find incentives to have it, then that's the marriage.
But I'd go one step further and say for the county to move forward on that, we want some type of agreement between the municipalities that we're all doing the same thing. In other words, everybody buys it. Because in truth, the county probably has the least footprint for electric vehicles. These municipalities have the density, way more than the county unincorporated.
That's true. That's
Yeah,
true.
and a good example, Joe, of that is single-use plastic bags, where you had, I'll use that because
I hate them all.
I know,
I'm sorry.
but all the municipalities that got together and agreed on that
Yeah.
at that point.
But I think there's a lot of strength in that. When we have a consensus and we're all pulling the rope in the same direction, I think we can achieve a lot.
I mean,
Yeah.
even if the recommendation is more general, like incentivize or recommend a certain, amount of parking spaces be EV ready or something like that.
I mean, at a minimum, get the big three.
And then let staff sort of like
Right.
research what's going on around locally and sort of try to maintain,
Naomi, do you want to just talk about the process and the role of this committee and kind of the actions?
Yeah, definitely. This is in your workbook too. The county council are the deciders, sort of on the plan. This group and all the community engagement that we're doing as well help us, SSG and civics, to come up with basically describing like the details of how you would achieve like a successful implementation of a climate action plan. My apologies, it's early on the West Coast here, everyone. So essentially, we make it as clear as possible, but we are not here to prescribe what it is that you do. That is over, of course, to the county to decide exactly how it wants to implement. But our job is to make your options to hit your targets as clear as possible, both from the how fast and how far do you have to go to how feasible, where's the funding to make it happen? You know, what did the community tell us they also wanted to see happen first? Because as you can imagine, this is a multi-decade like effort to implement. And each region will have a different set too of starting actions. Like, what does your first 5-year window look like, you know, particular to Charleston County? And we want to set you up for success. So that's all the stuff that we're analyzing sort of right now, the questions that we're asking, the research that we're doing, the modeling that we're completing, and the conversations that we're having with you go into answering those questions for you. Will it be as specific as you said, like each house needs to have X number of EVs? No, but could you decide that that's what you need to do to meet your target? Yes. So you have to complete the suite of actions. So it's not about a debate on actions one-on-one. It's us showing you what would need to happen and what we think is most feasible for you to implement to be successful. But the choice will always be over to the county. And then there's things outside of jurisdictional control, you know, sort of as well, where the county might take an advocacy role because it doesn't have, as Jared mentioned in implementation, how much influence does it have, you know what I mean, on that sector, for example. And so we'll describe in as much detail as we can too, where we think the county can have success, where it doesn't have, you know, full jurisdictional control. And I think it was mentioned earlier in this meeting, you know, don't just use county language, like see it as regional. And that's very much the spirit of how successful climate action plans are implemented, is to see this as the county or the local government is one actor in a constellation of a team of actors, you know, in the region to get there. Because certainly the size of this problem is large, you know, it needs everybody, you know, pulling in a similar direction, but we give you enough information to know what choices you'll want to make. And so certainly for some actions, it's going to be about incentivization, and that might be the most appropriate way to go. In other places, that action might be better implemented through regulation, but those are very specific governance and political questions that need to be answered by the decision makers. And we need to provide the right type of briefing and information to both you and them to make effective recommendations.
Based on Joe's comment, which is very realistic, I know that Mount Pleasant has a resilience officer, correct?
I think it's like emergency management and resilience. I think that's what.
Yeah, she does both.
Is there anything in North Charleston?
They have emergency management, and I think they're trying to get there with a resilience person.
Wait till after But that might be an interesting part, and whether or not, as a guest, we can invite to this group. As a guest, someone from Mount Pleasant and someone from North Charleston, and of course, the city of Charleston already has, you know, a little representative.
We can invite them. They're on our internal working group, so it might be easier to get their feedback that way, only because this group, they have to do the public comment thing, which is a little more formal, so we can kind of get their feedback internally and share it.
Okay.
Although not all of those municipalities have like sustainability or resilience
Right.
people, we do have representatives. It's just a little tough because they're pulled in many different directions, because unlike us, they're not working specifically on these issues. So yeah. Any other questions before we wrap up? Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone. Good to see you all again. And thank you again for this discussion. It's been very valuable.
Thanks so much, y'all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So
Thank you. Y'all have a good day.